Like, I never liked Tekken. I was a DOA guy. Don't judge me too harshly.
We're done. We're done.
How's it going, guys? I'm the Philosopher, and welcome to another episode of FGC Philosophy. And today, I've got a person I've been wanting to have on here for a while. Took some time, but I have Michael Martin from Yahoo eSports. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I feel bad because I missed our last appointment, and I can't even remember what happened. But I think we had it planned over the weekend, and I just forgot. And I didn't check my work email that weekend. So I felt terrible. I was like, this guy never wants to talk to me again.
No, nothing like that. It's been a crazy couple of months, and it's finally slowing down for me. So I'm hoping to do more videos and have interviews at regular hours that people can actually do. So that's no offense taken here. I'm just glad to be actually sitting down and talking to you. I actually look up to you and I discovered some of your work. So it's really cool to be able to talk to someone who's doing what I'm doing specifically. So that's really nice.
I appreciate that.
No problem. First question that I'm curious about, and hopefully other people are as well, is how did you get started doing all this?
So the funny thing is I never set out, I guess when I started everything, I didn't set out with the idea of like, oh, I'm going to write about, or not just write, but also do videos about fighting game stuff for a living, right? I had a terrible job. I worked there for like 7 years. Every single day, I pretty much hated it and I wanted out. I think that's something that most people can relate to. I would say the majority of people probably work at a job they either don't like or it's not their ideal job. And so at the ripe old age of, what was I, like 34, I think, is when I decided to make a change. Initially I went back to school. People who follow me may have seen me tweet out. It's actually this month that 2 years ago this month, I graduated from Arizona State. I live in the Seattle area. I went to school, Arizona State online, but I actually flew down for my graduation. So it took me 2 years. So 4 years ago, I went back to school. Got my bachelor's degree in mass communication and media studies. Pretty good program. They have some pretty good online programs for various bachelor's degrees. Actually, I think they even have some like graduate stuff. So if you're ever looking into going back to school, I feel like it's never too late. Anyway, I did that. But at the same time, now keep in mind, I was still working full time, and my girlfriend and I, we also had 2 young children at this point. Both kids were kind of born in this time frame. So working full time, going to school full time, kids through all of this. I also started freelance writing sort of on the side. And I used to run my own website. Like back in the day, I just felt like, oh, someday I'll be the next IGN. And like most people do who run video game websites. And that unless you have a lot of money, that's not how it works. So, long story short, I did all of that. I started freelancing. I got to know another freelancer who was sort of giving suggestions. He actually wrote a book that kind of helped talk about things like pitching stories and whatnot. And I just started pitching stories. Eventually landed one because I decided I didn't want to write for free anymore. Landed a story. From there, it just kind of snowballed as I got more work freelancing. Eventually, I got to the point where I was getting enough freelance work on the side that I could quit my full-time job, which I did while I pursued other things. My ultimate goal was to work as a video game writer or in the video games media full-time, the whole time. That was my goal the whole time. So freelanced. Got into Red Bull eSports. So this is where we get into the FGC side of things. Got into Red Bull eSports. And this was around the time eSports in the FGC was sort of blowing up with like Capcom Pro Tour, as well as Street Fighter V was coming soon. And the more fighting game content out there, I freelanced for IGN News for 18 months or so. I wrote almost everything fighting game related there when it came to news and whatnot. I kind of became the fighting game guy. So fast forward, I did Red Bull eSports for about a year. I did a lot of great work there, fantastic organization, fantastic outlet. But an opportunity opened up at Yahoo eSports where they needed someone to cover fighting games, both written content and video stuff. And video is very important when it comes to journalism and media, like games media especially. You have to be able to be on camera. That's almost a necessity at this point. Every job you apply for is going to ask for that. And so that was the right opportunity for me to get into that. So that was a little long-winded, longer than I'd hoped, but that was over a year ago. So I've been with Yahoo eSports for over a year now. And that's pretty much it.
Nice. Okay. I want to backtrack a little bit to something you said, and you kind of touched on it, but one, you had 2 kids, you were going to school, working a full-time job.
I also should say, don't ever do what I did. Like, do as I say, but not as I do. Don't ever go that route. It's hard.
So the thing I want to touch on really is the fact that like you were unhappy at your job and you made the effort, the conscious decision to change that situation, even despite the fact that you had kids and everything. It's kind of a 2-part question. One is, how did you find the motivation to do this, to like, go to school? And then 2, how did you get past the excuses like I don't have enough time, or I don't have enough money, or I don't have enough of something to do that?
So motivation for me was literally getting out of my old job. I mean, I guess that was the number one motivation. The other part of that, I think, is setting goals. I tell this story sometimes. I'll try to make this short. I was on vacation with family in Lake Tahoe, and at the time, our oldest son was barely a year old. And I remember sitting on the beach watching him. He was by the water playing on the beach, and I was actually listening to a podcast. And it was an episode, I always forget the episode number, but it's an episode of Podcast Beyond, IGN's podcast, when Greg Miller and Colin Moriarty were actually still on that podcast. They took an email question where someone had asked them about how they got into the industry, which is a common question for almost anyone, not just FGC, but journalism, especially when it comes to games, video games. Like, everyone wants to know how to get in. And basically Greg and Colin were like, well, I went to school and I applied a bunch of times, and finally, after however many interviews, I finally got in, right? Basically, I realized like, and these guys at the time were like my idols, right? But at the time I realized, wow, they're regular humans just like anyone else. They worked hard and they got what they want, right? And so I think just having that goal of like, hey, I want to work in games media in some form full-time someday. That was my only goal. I never wavered from that goal. That was my motivation for everything I've done in the last, I guess, 4 or 5 years. Another anecdote I like to share is one time I heard an episode of the Nerdist podcast with Morgan Freeman. And Chris Hardwick, who's the host, asked Morgan Freeman, way back when he was younger, because Morgan Freeman's fairly old now. He decided he wanted to act when he was young, like when he was in high school, I think. And Chris Hardwick asked him, was like, well, if that didn't work out, did you have like a second, like a fallback plan? And he's like, hell no, because if I have a fallback plan, then I'm not going 100% into my plan, my goal to be an actor. And I kind of, it was weird because it struck me because I was like, I don't have a fallback plan either. I've never had a fallback plan. I was like, well, I guess when I quit my job, I was like, well, I'll freelance as long as it takes, I guess. I don't know. I never had any other plan other than to do what I do now. So yeah, that's where the motivation came from. I think just the other things, like I never really made excuses. So this is a thing that I do talk about a lot on Twitter and social media. So some people who do know me or have followed me long enough know. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I've been sober for over 6.5 or 6 years. In the time that I was actively drinking, I made a lot of excuses and of course a lot of bad choices. In getting cleaned up, I'm in the position now where I don't have to make excuses for anything anymore. It's like you either do it or you don't. And I guess that's kind of where I was with everything. I'm like, there's just no excuse not to do this. There's no excuse not to go back to school. Luckily, I got some grants and I got some financial aid. Yes, I have student loans I have to pay off. But for the most part, I really never made any excuses about like, oh, I should quit doing this, or I should. There was a time that I almost quit freelancing, but other than that, I've just never made excuses about it. I just did it. All I could think about was looking forward and pursuing those goals.
I think there's a lot to that, and I don't know where to start to even dissect that. But I do want to try to not downplay what you just said, but also make it relevant to fighting games and not fighting games, because what you're saying with the excuses, that runs parallel to anybody who's great in fighting games right now, or anyone who gets to the point of greatness, is they don't make those excuses. And while I'm not great in Street Fighter, I've had many successes. I've gone from being homeless. I've gone from, being 300 pounds and changing all of that because I stopped making those excuses. Right. And what you're saying is absolutely right. And that's actually a really great story. And I hope a lot of people can learn from that inside and outside of the virtual ring, because when you do make those excuses, you're only hurting yourself. Yeah. So
I think when it comes to fighting games, I think it's one of those things where I think it's up to you as far as like how far you want to go, how competitive you want to be. Right. And to be fair, I don't think everyone can be, I guess, good or great at fighting games, right? I think it's just like anything else. You can only go so far, but I feel like if you have a goal and you want to reach that goal in fighting games, it's up to you to work towards it, right? Like no one else can do it for you. And so I feel like that's where a lot of the similarities as far as what I've done is going through, the last few years in my life, just personal, especially professional. Everything I've done professionally is yes, there are many things outside of my control, but all I've done is sort of try to improve myself and continue working towards that one goal. And to me, that's bears a lot of similarities to playing fighting games.
Yeah, definitely. And a question that I have that I'll preface with this explanation of like what I've learned about goal setting is it's important to have a really big goal. Like say your goal is to win a major, but in order to get to that point, you have to identify all the things that you have to do to get there. So there's micro goals within that. Like, how good is your footsies? How good is your execution? How good is your ability to read your opponent? And yada, yada, yada. I find that for me personally, it's very much the same thing when it comes to career with fitness and everything else. Do you find it to be the same thing in your experience?
Oh, 100%. For me, the larger goal was I want to work full time in games media, right? Then there's the I guess the goals, like the steps. How do you get there? Freelancing was sort of part of that. Adding more things, like here's what I want to accomplish. Whether it's like I want to write for this website, or I want to, in my case, right before we went on air, I was talking about I'm editing video now. Like that's actually something I've wanted to do for a very long time. But where do you find the time, especially when you're freelancing? If you're freelancing full time, you don't have time for anything. You're constantly working, right? But I mean, it's to me, it's about setting those goals and accomplishing the little things sort of along the way. You start with like little pebbles, and then eventually, I guess, you build yourself a mountain. And I think fighting games is like you said, very similar. You can work on one thing like 1 week, and then move on. Maybe accomplish your goal and move on to the next thing. Just sort of like layers. And I mean, I agree. I don't think you can just sort of set out and say, I want the world. It doesn't work like that, right? You have to have. There has to be some steps you take in between, and so. Definitely, I went through school, like I said, freelancing, all of that. I went through those steps, and there's still a lot of growth to go as well. Because now my goal is I'm here, but now I have to stay here. So I have to figure out how to stay within the industry, because these things, there's turnover all the time. So it's not permanent. You never know.
Right. So that said, do you have any goals, some new goals for what you're doing that you want to share?
When it comes to like the professional stuff, definitely I want to be more proficient with video, doing a video on my own. Look, I'm fortunate. I know not everyone is. I have a wonderful production staff at Yahoo. I'm gonna break the mirage here. I have a wonderful production staff that takes care of like everything. I hear it all the time from other guys at other sites when they're like, man, you know, I hate you. I wish I had a production crew. I'm like, I know. I'm sorry. That's sort of like my short-term goal is doing stuff like that. Ultimately, I think I guess the way I look at it now is there are a lot of projects that I would like to do that I don't quite know how to approach yet. You know, I guess it's more of like how to approach it and sort of how to accomplish it. This is all FGC related to. So I mean, yes, I have goals. It's not so much that I guess I got the job and like, oh, I don't have any more goals here. I'm done. Right. Obviously staying is one thing, but I think it's just a matter of, okay, what kind of content can I do now? And I also think that with new games coming out and with like FGC and esports growing, that sort of changes regularly. So specifically, you know, doing video stuff, I just want to be able to do more video. I want to be on camera more. I want to, I guess present myself more, but also I want to be able to present like the FGC, Street Fighter, Marvel, Tekken. I mean, any work I can do to kind of help present the FGC to new people coming into these games or esports. I'd love to be able to do that.
Yeah, I agree with that for myself as well. There's like a lot of goals that I have that are kind of similar in different ways, I'm sure. But that leads me to another question that I really wanted to ask you is the FGC has grown up a lot. It's maturing, and it still is maturing and finding its own identity. I would say it's kind of in the teenage phases right now, maybe getting to like that young adult area. But I'm curious to know what you think of the direction that the FGC is going in now with like E-League happening, and you have Injustice 2 and Marvel coming out. And we saw how good Capcom Pro Tour was and how good E-League was. You know, what do you think the direction that we're going in? What do you think of that?
That is an interesting question. And strangely, that's a question that I ask everyone else. And I guess I've never really thought about it until now. So growing pains. Yeah, I would say like that teen sort of like early 20s, like, oh, I'm 21, I can drink now. I kind of feel like that's where we're at sometimes, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, I think everything goes through its growing pains. Fighting games, especially, and esports, fighting games as I guess competitive fighting games has been around forever, right? Like, but esports were fairly new to that compared to other games or other games or communities that are more mature in the sense of like, hey, we're esports, not so much necessarily like in their communities or like their online communities. But where it's going, I think things like, well, obviously we're in a golden age. I think we're in a golden age of fighting games right now. I feel like we're in a similar time as like the arcades back in maybe their early mid 90s, where there's lots of games to play. We have a lot of choices. Obviously, esports has a lot of influence in some of those choices. A lot of people still aren't happy with Street Fighter V, but people are still playing it. It's the biggest fighting game esport, has the biggest Pro Tour season, right? And things like E-League. I'm going to be honest, I am more surprised at how much I like E-League and how well it's done than I ever thought I would be. I honestly didn't think it was gonna be that great. We've seen Street Fighter on TV before, and hasn't been ideal in my opinion. But I think E-League really has done really well, and I feel like they've probably worked with a lot of the right people to kind of to keep that feeling like, oh, this is FGC. And I think because of that, I feel like we'll continue to grow from that. So ultimately, I think FGC will continue to grow, more games, more exposure. Esports will help FGC grow. But I definitely feel like the the TV part of that, the being on TBS and E-League, I feel like that's important. I feel like if there's going to be look, FGC is still a slow burn when it comes to esports to me, right? We're still sort of years away from being where League and Dota are, in my opinion. But I feel like exposure like things like E-League will actually provide the largest leap. And of course, games that everyone likes or wants to play. So whether it's Injustice 2, which actually launches, I think, tomorrow as of this recording, or Tekken in less than a month, and Marvel in 4 months. Marvel has a chance to, I think, be really, really huge. Maybe kind of pick up where, Street Fighter V should have been when it launched. Who knows? But ultimately, yeah, I think we're growing. I think it's going well. I think there's still a lot of things we have to learn, but it is kind of a slow burn. So those of us that want FGC to be like all esports, you kind of have to temper your expectation a little bit.
Yeah. I agree with a lot of that. And I will say the one thing about Street Fighter, even if you don't like the game, but you're very strong towards the FGC, you have to admit how much it's done for the FGC, depending on your viewpoint.
Yeah.
Because for me, I want fighting games to be a legitimate form of entertainment / business. It's a whole ecosystem. A lot of people look at it as just the fighters, but there's a whole ecosystem that backs up that thing happening. There's the people, there's the cameramen, there's the people who coordinate it. You have the TOs, you have like all the vendors that go there and represent it, the sponsors. You have a whole like literal ecosystem, like an economic ecosystem that's helping this system grow. So yeah. While I fully understand that a lot of people love the grassroots aspect of it, and I don't want that to go away because it's more accessible than stuff like E-League, which are more invitationals. I want those to grow, but I do think that it's good for the overall industry, and there's going to be more opportunity as this industry that we're creating grows, and you can be a part of it because it's still so early. So I'm excited to see where it goes, and I'm excited to see what happens with Injustice, with Tekken. I'm thinking about getting fighting games I've never considered. Like I never liked Tekken. I was a DOA guy. Don't judge me too harshly.
We're done.
This interview is over.
I don't know if you know this, but I'm actually I haven't played Tekken seriously since like Tekken 3, Tekken Tag, but of course this is back in arcades, but my buddies and I, my buddies were always better at Street Fighter than me, and I was like the Tekken guy. So I've always had like actually a special place in my heart for Tekken.
Yeah. I knew that about you already.
And I've never liked DOA.
Well, here's the thing is that I've always been like just instantly good at DOA, and none of my friends around me could really play it, except for my online friends and people who are like I know the people who are top at DOA, the Excalibur blades and stuff like that. So it just was something that came natural, where Tekken was so stiff, but it looks good now. Like to me, it looks good now because of my proficiency in fighting games overall. I appreciate the game on a higher level than I ever could because I was a button masher back then. So that game looks great. Injustice looks great. And if, the FGC keeps growing the way it is, I think, the sky is the limit when it comes to this kind of stuff, because they're going to try to make games somewhat more accessible, but not, there's still like the actual game developers, I think, are still maturing, because you can see with Ed coming out, you see them playing around with the buttons.
I think with development, so to me, development has been, I think, the biggest issue. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just because all of these fighting games are still primarily, with the exception of, I guess, Killer Instinct, which, by the way, you talk about games that you played that you were never really into. Like, I never liked Killer Instinct back in the arcades. I remember when Killer Instinct, the current version, came out in 2014, I think. 13 or 14. I mean, I remember I've watched a lot of Killer Instinct, and I remember seeing it and I'm thinking, wow, this looks pretty cool, right? But I never actually really played it until I think earlier this year even. Maybe it was season 3 that came out or something prompted me to try it out. And so I've been playing it a little bit. So it's the idea that, there's a lot of games out there that are coming out. Injustice 2. I'm not even on my radar until they showed Swamp Thing and Dr. Fate. And I'm like, those characters look amazing. Mm-hmm. It still looks a little goofy with the animation. Like I don't know what is with NRS and those animations, but but other than that, like there's a lot of really cool looking stuff in that game. And to be honest with you, I'm actually really kind of pumped about the idea of this game has like collectibles in the form of gear, and you can actually use that like in like competitive play. It just doesn't have the stats or whatever, right? So you can get whatever, you can gear out your character. Anyways, going back to the development part of this, Japanese, and this was across like all video games, not just fighting games, but Japanese developers have really struggled with talking about legacy developers like Sega, Konami, Capcom, like all these Square, all these developers have really struggled, I think, to sort of either catch up or adapt to how things have changed over the years. And you see it, like Konami went through all that mess with Kojima, and they put out Metal Gear 5, and then he leaves, right?
Oh my goodness.
Like if you're a fan of video games, which most of us are, like that's almost sacrilegious, right? So then you have Capcom, who's struggling with Street Fighter 5 because they're trying something new. And to me, that's where you I feel like I give them the benefit of the doubt, and I'd like other people too. They're literally trying something all new with a fighting game in Street Fighter 5. And yes, it's been rough. I think they're still playing catch up a little bit based on the launch and the problems they've had. I feel like that's something that takes time, right? This is not a thing you can fix overnight. But just the idea of like everything's changed as far as how video games have been made, marketed, produced, all of that in the last 20 years. And so now we're in this time where there's a lot of experimentation, or there's just, it's just people are, I guess, willing to try something different or something new. It may not work out. And that's what, like I said, maybe Marvel comes out and Marvel's like the best thing ever. Who knows, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe having story mode, a legit story mode, like an arcade mode, let's say, not story mode, having a legit arcade mode was all you ever needed to do to keep the casual players or get more people in, right? I don't know. I guess we could find out. But yeah, it's a very interesting time for game development in general, and especially fighting games, and eSports influences a lot of that too now, right? So I don't know, it's pretty crazy.
Two things. One, I got to briefly mention, I don't know if you can see it on my wall, but I'm a huge Metal Gear Solid fan. Favorite game series ever. But something else that I feel enough people haven't talked about, or I haven't seen many people talking about it, is the fact that right now we're still in the early stages of this, but we're going to see more FGC for the FGC by the FGC video games. You have people like Combo Fiend working on Street Fighter, which I think is like the early stages of that. I think people who worked on Iron Galaxy, Killer Instinct, that was a thing. You had Mike Z creating Skullgirls, and a game that I'm looking forward to, which is, it's not even in development yet that I know of, but Sonic Fox, one of the best players in FGC, not just Mortal Kombat, but just in general, like anything that he plays, he's great at, including DOA, just so you know. He has won some DOA tournaments, but there's a
little family history with DOA there, though.
Yeah, Excalibur Blades, Ryan, or I think it's Ryan, or some other guy. I can't think of his name right now. I'm like super amped up. It's not Ryan, it's the other guy that I can't think of right now. MC Quiggle, that's it. That's his brother, who's like also one of the best DOA players in the world right now, or at least in America. Yeah. But I think it might have been your interview, or it was an interview with Sonic Fox, where he talks about he wants to go to school for video game development so that he can create a fighting game. And someone of his caliber making a fighting game with the right resources is going to be amazing. Something that a lot of people don't know about me is my background is actually in animation and game design, and I've worked on a few indie games creating fighting games, and that's where my love of fighting games actually came from. I already like fighting games, but after I learned how intricate it took, like how much work it took to actually create a fighting game, I was like, I have not been playing fighting games on the level like as deep as it should be appreciated. Like fighting games are an art, and I was only scratching the surface up until that point until afterwards. And then I really got heavy into fighting games after that, because it's creating a fighting game is something totally different. While the games that I made were not good or at all, I learned so much from those games.
That's just it, though. I think especially media people, I've the freelancer who first got me into writing about video games, Nathan Meunier, he put out a book called Up, Up, Down, Down, Left, Right.
Yeah.
Yes. He has since, I think he still does some freelancing, but he's since went into game development. So he put out a game with a small team, and I think he's put out like 3 games. One was with a small team, and I think the last 2 he's done were just himself. But whenever you see guys like that do that, and not just media guys, anyone, you see them get into development, I think that's when you see the appreciation for, or a better appreciation for video games. Because look, I say this all the time, man. People think it's just as simple as like, hey, all you have to do is flip a switch and you got arcade mode, or you flip a switch and like this character is better, or this. That's not how game development works. Like I'm ignorant to game development. I don't know. But what I do know is it's hard. Okay. And maybe that's what some developers or publishers could do better, is to convey to like the public that, hey, you know what? Prey's a mess when it comes out. Prey being a first person, I guess, action shooter that just released, right? It was a mess. IGN scored it like a 4 and everyone was pissed off, right? Ooh. But the reviewer hit a game-breaking bug. He could not finish the game because of this game-breaking bug. And, you know, to me, it's like, well, all you have to do is flip a switch. And, man, that's not how it works. It doesn't work like that. Now, eventually they put out a patch. It worked. IGN rescored it in 8.0, which is actually interesting because I'm not sure how often they've done that. But anyway, my point is things just aren't as simple as everyone thinks it is. And I think sometimes it's actually good for developers and publishers to be more upfront and try to inform, you know, average Joe, like, look, this is difficult and here's why. I think what happens is we get a lot of people who are sort of like, you know, whether they're engineers or whatever, they don't know how to explain these things simply. But hey, that's why, you know, you have guys like me. You can talk to me and I can help explain to the public why it's difficult, right? I would like to see more of that, to be honest with you.
I 100% agree. A few of the companies that I work with, and I won't list them off, but they had what I'll call the Peter Molyneux effect, where they were like, this is going to be the greatest thing ever. We don't have any credentials to prove so, but we want your money and you're going to have a great game. And it wasn't that. A lot of people, I don't want to say all, but, you know, it's just that this whole marketing aspect of things kind of blinds people from the human aspect of like, hey, you know, this is where we're actually at right now. We're having some struggles, or maybe getting some input from the people who are going to be playing the game. I think there should be more of that. We have the betas, but I do think that's still a little bit too not personal. I don't know the easiest way to do that, especially with bigger companies, but it is something that I 100% agree with. People should be more open, and that leaves you with being more forgiving. You know, when something bad does happen, like when Capcom does something, because they're so secretive with all their information, when they do mess up, you hear it, and like people will just like, even though they'll say, I love this company, but they're not afraid to be like, you need to fix this, this, and this. And I can't disagree with them. Because sometimes their points are very valid. Sometimes you have the complainers, but I think there are a lot of good points. And sometimes I think Capcom's gotten better and is still trying to get better at it, but they, you know, them and other companies as well. Cause I do love Capcom. I like their games. I like Street Fighter, just for the record. But yeah, I 100% agree.
I think what you have sometimes though is to me, it's like you have a community that is, yeah, you know, they're kind of frustrated. Look, I love Street Fighter 5. I've played a lot of different Street Fighters going back from 2 and on, right? Is it different? 100%. Is it Street Fighter? Maybe not in the sense that most of us who've played Street Fighter for a long time are used to. But I do understand that sometimes you have people or a community that's speaking out, and I mean, sometimes it just feels like you're just walking out in the street and just shouting, and you don't know if anyone's listening, right? Mm-hmm. And this is not only a Capcom thing. Just like the beta not working right when it launched. I don't know what the issues were, but you know, look, beta launches just like a game launches. Everyone's trying to get in. There's going to be some issues. That's kind of like where we're at. in video games nowadays, right? It's not just a fighting game thing. It's not just a Capcom thing. It's not just a Street Fighter thing. But yeah, I think that, I mean, to me, this just goes back to, I guess, communication in general. And I think this is part of like that learning curve, those growing pains for a developer nowadays, where, like I said, I mean, Capcom Japan, they're just not used to this, to communicating like that, right? This is sort of an all new thing. I mean, they put out a game, you either bought it or you didn't. And, back when Street Fighter 4 came out, it's not like the internet was new, but I mean, like, we didn't really have the tools to voice our opinions like we did back in 2008 or 2009, right? So everything's changed. I mean, I don't know if you remember, but I remember when Street Fighter 4 came out. And I think about that time to where, like, now where we're at now, everything was completely different. The world was different. Not just technology, but the world was different. So, like, yeah, how we play games, how we consume, like, entertainment in general is just completely different from even 8 years ago.
That's a good point. In video games, the way, like, with DLC and everything, like, fighting games have obviously adapted to that. And I think that Street Fighter 5 has done a pretty good job, where I remember there's like the Super Street Fighter, Ultra Turbo, Omega Alpha. Like, you had all of those and you had to buy those individually. Even Marvel vs. Capcom had two different versions, but I don't think that's going to be a thing anymore. I haven't bought a single character with real money yet, but I've purchased like 4 characters or so, which is great.
I don't know. Like, I still feel like that's going to be a thing, with the exception of like Street Fighter 5, obviously, because that's the model they've chosen. I don't know that it's necessarily a bad thing to get away from that sort of model. I think, obviously the joke is like, yeah, you have, champion, hyper, ultra, whatever editions, right? Like, yeah, kind of got a little, I don't know. They kind of ran with that, but, in all honesty, I actually expected this to happen. I would love to see them launch a Super Street Fighter 5 right now. I know they said they weren't going to do that, and people are like, oh yeah, sure. But, and you know what? People are going to be like, oh, I told you so if that happens. But I think with season 2 and that character pass, I actually thought that if you want to build some good PR, now's as good a time as any to just drop a Super Street Fighter 5, have all the content, and maybe include some of the stuff that people were asking for that they didn't get in the launch, right? The original launch. But yeah, I understand where you're going, and like I said, everything's different.
Here's what I think they might do if they did something like that. I think they would repackage the game with all the DLC, but not change the fact that you can have the vanilla version and still play with everybody else. I think they should do some sort of new like campaign for the game to kind of revitalize with new people. And I agree that I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. It's just that it doesn't have to be as inconvenient now, because the main thing was all the balance patches and new characters. And the fact that you can do it digitally now without any hard copy kind of defeats the purpose of of just having the hard copy and not doing the digital version, pretty much. So I think there's a best of both worlds that could happen, because Mortal Kombat did that with their XL. I think that's the same concept.
XL specifically had, I guess, more content, but that's when they also rolled out their all new netcode. With Street Fighter, like, yeah, I mean, they should push out balance patches, whatever, for free forever. I mean, I feel like that's what they should do. But I mean, to me, when I look at like a Super Street Fighter 5 release, that to me, that's just like, hey, we're just going to collect everything, repackage it, sell it at like a discounted rate compared to what you would have to pay, separate for everything, whatever, right? I've always kind of felt, or at least I felt in the last year or so, that when I look at like Street Fighter 4, Street Fighter 4 had its good and bad times also, right? I think for the most part, I mean, it single-handedly, I think, revived the fighting game industry when it launched, because for the most part, like, fighting games were dead at that point, right? And I stopped playing vanilla after, I think, whatever, maybe it was super. Basically, I played boxer in vanilla, and every character got better than but Boxer didn't. Like, he didn't get worse, but every character got better. So it was harder to deal with, right? So I just lost interest. And I feel like it took, a few years for that game to really sort of like become almost the phenomenon that it became. And, I kind of feel like Street Fighter V is in the same boat. Like, maybe by year 3 is when everything's clicking and you've got, whatever character pass 3 is with, whether it's Sagat, Sakura, whoever, right? Like, I feel like it again, these things take time. And I understand being, sort of antsy about it and impatient, but I do feel like this is something that will sort of come together. I hope, I hope it comes together, like legit comes together by year 3. But I do feel like they're on a pretty good path, and I really like the approach they've taken with new characters too.
Yeah. And I agree wholeheartedly, and I wish we had more time because I'm loving this conversation. So I got some just closing questions for you. Excuse me.
Sure.
Starting with, we talked on this a little bit, but just if you had to give some advice to someone in our industry, what would you tell them?
I think the first, the thing that I hear the most is, how do I do this or how do I do that? I guess the two things I've always sort of heard from other people, the two pieces of advice I've been given, is one, you have to just do it. I don't know, how you started with video, but I assumed it was sort of like hey, I want to kind of do this thing. And I think that's where it stops for a lot of people, because they're just like, I want to do this thing, but they never do it, right? Well, for whatever reason, you have to just do it. When it comes to making video content, it doesn't necessarily have to be great. Everyone's got a camera in their phone, right? So you can just start doing video and upload it, right? The other thing that I think is important is I was told by someone at IGN when I started freelancing there, and they found out I quit my job, was just keep grinding. You just have to keep grinding. Yes, there are days that I don't want to do this. There's days that I wake up and I'm like, look, I love what I do, but I really don't want to do anything today, right? But you just have to keep at it. And, hopefully eventually, I kind of feel like not everyone's going to get what they want. This is not a perfect world. I don't really believe in hey, if you work hard, you'll get everything you want, because sometimes that doesn't happen. And I'd be willing to bet more often than not, that doesn't happen to a lot of people. But, you have to keep grinding. You have to keep working towards whatever it is you want. You have to keep working towards your goals. So just do it and keep grinding. Perfect. And last question is, where can they find you? I am on Twitter way too much. So the best way to look me up is probably on Twitter, at Bizarro_Mike. That's 1 Z, 2 R's. We talked about this earlier, but yes, I am trying to beef up my YouTube channel. So youtube.com/BizarroArcade. I really wish I could stick to a regular Twitch streaming schedule, but it's tough right now. I'm so cool. I forgot what my actually my Twitch is the same as my Twitter, so it's Bizarro_Mike also. And I have a Facebook page, facebook.com/FGC Mike. I want to thank you. It was nice to actually have you on the show. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, and you did not let me down. This was a great conversation, so thank you. I know, high expectations. But yeah, if anybody has any comments, of course, let me know down below. Press that like button, and if you like these kinds of videos, hit that subscribe button to let me know that I'll keep making more for you guys. But until then, I'll see you in the next one, and thank you, Mike, for joining. Thank you for having me.